War is raging in Ukraine and West Asia. The Israel-Iran war threatens to turn into a wider conflict. Now, India is best placed to help douse these fires. On his recent trip to Kiev, Prime Minister Modi underlined the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi's message. When Prime Minister Modi says it's not a time for war, is he taking the message of Gandhian non-violence to the world? Can the land of Gandhi, India, bring peace to the world? Now, from Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela, Albert Einstein to Al Gore and John Lennon, the Mahatma's lessons in non-violence have impressed one and all. But how relevant is Gandhi in today's world? On the 155th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, my colleague Deepak Bhadana spoke with Professor Dalton of Barnard College, Columbia University. Professor Dalton is the author of multiple books, including Mahatma Gandhi, Nonviolent Power in Action, and Indian Ideal of Freedom. Let's listen into the excerpt of this interview.
From Martin Luther King to Nelson Mandela, Albert Einstein to Al Gore, and even John Lennon, the Mahatma's lessons in non-violence have impressed one and all. But how relevant is Gandhi in today's world?
Gandhi was immensely relevant during this time and continues to be so now. The main relevance, of course, is non-violence and the way in which non-violence applies throughout the world to stopping our chief concern now, and that is the prevalence of violence in the form of wars that are going on right now. The United States happens to be the arms merchant of the world, sending weapons all over the world. And so our military-industrial complex is financing war. The task, myself as an American and others throughout the world, is to use Gandhi's method of nonviolence, civil disobedience on a mass scale, the way in which Martin Luther King did, and I was a follower of Martin Luther King in the 60s, the way in which others since. So to be clear, the relevance of Gandhi is his non-violent mass civil disobedience as a relevant, important, effective method to combat the wars and the domestic violence that's occurring now.
Today, there are prolonged wars raging in Ukraine and West Asia. Israel's offensives on Iran's proxies have gone into an overdrive and now threaten to turn into a wider regional conflict. Will Gandhi's brand of non-violence and social harmony pass muster with Netanyahu, Putin, Zelensky, or Trump?
Well, Trump is the problem that I'm facing right now, of course. Netanyahu is definitely feeding off the United States, but in terms of what we have now with an election coming up, Trump is the major threat to our democracy. And if that democracy collapses, it will not be easily regained in the face of his demagoguery and the way in which he's despotically organizing a movement throughout the United States. So my task as an American and the task of others is to engage in some form of nonviolent civil disobedience that will in some way mobilize people to resist this despot.
With its stand on being on the side of peace, India is perhaps best placed to help put out these fires. On his recent trip to Kiev, PM Modi underlined the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi's message. So can the land of Gandhi bring peace to the world?
We are here, you and I am here to celebrate Gandhi and his birthday. He would be 155 years old today. And to commemorate then Gandhi's teachings. Gandhi liked to say over and again that there were contradictions in his teachings because of his own development. And he changed his mind. So he advised us to take seriously the latest that he said, that is his last words, And so today, to commemorate his birthday and to think of the time of his assassination, we can look to his last will and testament. This is a document that has not been studied enough, but it speaks to the government of India today and also previously. Now, the last will and testament, this was a title given to it by his secretary, Barnard. In fact, Gandhi called it a draft constitution of Congress. It's in his collected works, Mahatma Gandhi. And it's dated, remarkably, on the day before he was assassinated, January 29th. So it is his last word. Now, what does he tell India to do at that point? Well, first of all, he remarkably urges the Indian National Congress to disband and become not a party, but a social service organization to spread throughout the country and to serve those people who are in desperate need. Imagine that for a moment, what that would be, to disband the party system in India and to move ahead from his point of view to social reforms, not political disobedience first and foremost, but social reforms. And as you know, he had in mind when he spoke of social reforms, the abolition of untouchability, which was with him throughout his life, Hindu-Muslim comity rather than enmity, and then finally equality throughout the society. That is the idea of Sarvodaya, uplift of all. That lesson contained specifically in his draft constitution for Congress or his last will and testament was discussed by no one in the Congress after that time. It was to be given to the Indian National, or the Working Committee, and to Nehru and Patel and others. It was not. They ignored it, and it has not been revived since. So when we talk about Gandhi, let's talk about the contents of that last will and testament. The focus, remember, is on non-violence. That is how social workers will spread this throughout the message, this creed throughout the country. And the way in which these people, servants of society, will not lust for power, but rather speak to the need of the villages, Panchayati Raj, and spread it out. Gandhi stressed this message of nonviolence, this emphasis on social reform. But it was not only that. In the last will and testament, perhaps his most important message was decentralization of political power and the states. If we had that in the United States today, true decentralization, we as a nation wouldn't be able to inflict a degree of harm on other countries and on ourselves to this degree. Now, notice decentralization in the United States or in India isn't just giving power to the states. It's breaking it down. Panchayati Raj is breaking it down to village councils and then feeding up. So in India today, that's the message that Gandhi speaks to, and that is the way in which the nation-state system must be broken up into small, very small councils, villages, with an emphasis on the village. That's his universal message. Power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so we must try to, in some way, dismantle this power. The means are there. Mass, non-violent civil disobedience. That's the remedy. It can be done with that remedy.
Professor Dalton, one of your book compares Gandhi's methods and the strategies of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. How can today's leaders take a leaf out of this playbook?
Malcolm X was very like Gandhi, as I'm glad you pointed him out. I met Malcolm X, talked with him about Gandhi, and towards the end of his life, he developed an inclusive message that was in contrast to his separatism earlier. So I talk about him in my book as a representative of Swaraj, that is, of personal development and of change. And he saw that necessity of inclusiveness at the end of his life. Unfortunately, he was assassinated at only 39 years old, so he didn't have time to develop. Martin Luther King had a grasp of satyagraha in a way that no other leader after King had in the United States or elsewhere. And in his biography, Stride Towards Freedom, in a section called Pilgrimage Towards Nonviolence, he sets forth the 6 principles of nonviolence. And they are Gandhian to a T. They are specific in terms of the way in which nonviolence must not be passive, but it must be active. And active in the sense of spreading the teaching of love and compassion. That creed is what Martin Luther King adapted. Think of the extraordinary nature of a person who is only at this time in his 20s, reading about Gandhi, being taught about Gandhi, a different race, different culture, adopting a different way of life, and yet making that work in the civil rights struggle until he was assassinated at age 39. Now note further this, if Gandhi had been assassinated at age 39, you and I couldn't possibly be celebrating his birthday today or anything about him. He wouldn't have even written in Swaraj. He wouldn't have achieved what he did in South Africa. That kind of perspective we must appreciate. In America, we have been cut off from our best leaders. And that kind of leadership, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, is absolutely essential to make work the mass civil disobedience movement. You know, we have debates going on, as you followed, in the United States. And the debates that are occurring tonight, for example, between our vice presidential candidates and occurred between the 2 candidates for president in the United States. There are 2 items that will not be mentioned in those debates, the one coming up tonight and the previous ones. They couldn't be mentioned. They are at the heart of Gandhi's message, but they couldn't be mentioned because the political system here will not allow it. The first, of course, is civil disobedience. No one calls for mass civil disobedience today. It's absurd from their point of view. The political party system will not allow it. We must resist this with mass civil disobedience. That's Gandhi's message. And then the other is that the United States happens to be, as I said before, the arms merchant of the world. We must cut back our military budget, not just a few percentage points, but massively, in half and then in quarters. That won't be mentioned tonight or in the vice presidential debates, and it wasn't mentioned before. Here's Gandhi's message to us and to you in India, and that is mass civil disobedience and the arming of the country in such a way that it's becoming more and more a militaristic phenomenon. We haven't seen much. Now, what is happening, as you know, in Israel and the Middle East today is a monstrous display of weaponry that the United States has supported, as I've said. But in addition to that, this cannot lead to any kind of ultimate victory for either side. This kind of military, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that's what Gandhi said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and the whole world goes blind. Well, the whole world in the Middle East will go blind if they keep this up. And we need urgently a ceasefire, but we need an arms embargo. You see how relevant Gandhi is today in terms of urging the necessity of peace, the stopping of this insane warfare.
It's been a privilege talking to you, Professor Dalton. Thank you.